What's up guys, Chandler here with Rise. It's great to see you on a Monday. I know it's weird, Monday, right? Usually it's a Thursday, but I figured I'd do a bonus upload because in last week's video, I said, hey, if you guys wanna see all the nitty-gritty details of my camera gear, how I use it here on YouTube, but also for my traveling, sports, filmmaking, documentary stuff I do all the time for my full-time job, I'll dive right into the nitty-gritty details of all my camera gear for you. I was pretty pumped to see the response to that. Lots of you were interested in this sort of video, so let's go ahead and get nerdy. And I will dive into all my camera gear, what I use it for, what it's intended for, what my favorite things about it, all those sorts of details. Don't worry, the glasses were just for a joke. Forget about that. Let's not waste any time. Let's hop in on my first piece of camera gear, the main beast, the Canon C200. One thing I wanna note is that throughout the duration of this video, if I'm talking about a certain piece of camera gear, let's say the camera or the lens or the equipment, any footage that you see me overlaying over top of it, that is footage from that piece of equipment. Got it? Cool. All right, so first, the Canon C200. This camera is my main camera for what I do for my full-time job, sports documentary filmmaking. It is the beast behind almost all of my films since about July 2019. Now, when I first started this job back in June of 2019, they gave me full reign to decide what camera I wanted to get for work. Obviously, I still had my Sony, which I'll talk about later in this video, but they wanted me to get a new camera for work. So I had a couple options, but there were a few reasons I chose the Canon C200 above other options. Number one is reliability. This camera always goes. It has a massive battery pack with huge battery life that will last me all day, no problem. 2 SD card slots and a CFast card slot. If you don't know what CFast is, it's like a faster SD card that's actually, unfortunately, a lot more expensive. But the main things I love about this camera is one, it has the Canon EF mount lens, which means I can use almost any lens in the whole world. There's always gonna be Canon mount lenses and stuff like that. There's also another pretty amazing thing that is gonna keep me with this camera for a long time, unless another camera makes something like this, which is the built-in ND filters that this Canon C200 has. I'll try and keep this from being like an educational video, but pretty much for those of you who don't know what ND filters are, I like to shoot as wide open as possible and get that depth of field when the situation calls for it. So I wanna keep my aperture as low as possible when I can, just because I like the way the image looks. But if it's too bright outside, the image is gonna be way too overexposed and way too blown out, no matter how much I adjust my ISO and adjust my shutter speed to a point. Now, that's where the ND filters come in. They're basically sunglasses that go over the image sensor. This way my images are correctly exposed while keeping my aperture wide open. It's a really cool feature and is absolutely essential for shooting footage outside like I did at this baseball camp. Now, the other main thing I was looking for when deciding for a camera for sports documentary filmmaking is I knew I need to have slow motion to capture sports moments. Sports happen extremely fast, and when I'm editing a mix, especially documentary style, when I don't know what's gonna happen and I have to make a video about it after the fact, it really helps to shoot at a high frame rate and have that slow motion option. Now, my old Sony, which I'll talk about later in this video once again, it shot at 120 FPS at 1080p. This Canon has the same option. Now, 120 FPS video can be slowed down to 20% without it being too choppy. This Canon can do 120 FPS too, but that's not why I wanted it. There's a lot of cameras that can do 120. Your iPhone can do 120. What this camera can do is it can shoot at 4K, which is something that I knew I needed, shooting at 4K, because I want the ability to recrop my images, because once again, I'm shooting documentary style, so I might not be in the best place at the best time at all times, so I want that ability to be able to zoom in, recrop without losing image quality. But I also wanted some form of slow motion. So the Canon C200 can do 4K video at 60 FPS, which means I can take my 4K video and slow it down to about 40% speed without losing any consistency in terms of the choppiness of the footage. Now, in terms of audio on the Canon C200, I'm shooting a ton of interviews, always have the athlete or whoever the subject is, I use their voice in the background of the video, stuff like that, you know, whatever I'm doing. So the microphone of choice for me is the Rode NT-G3. Big shout out to my boy Drew Darby for recommending it to me back in the day. The microphone is incredible. I'm using it right now on a stand so you can get my voice better. When I'm running around with the camera doing my thing, it's obviously mounted on top of the camera, but when I can, in an interview setting, I try and set it up and bring it as close to the subject as possible. Now, for lenses on the Canon C200, my go-to lens, the one that's on there, I would say 70 to 80% of the time, is the Sigma 18 to 35 millimeter f1.8 lens. As I said before, I am a sucker for low aperture lenses, and this lens gives me the ability to have a little bit of zoom from 18 to 35, so pretty wide angle to a little bit tight, and still get that cinematic shallow depth of field. It's also really important for me to have a low aperture lens, not just so I can get that shallow depth of field, but so I can have better low light shots. When I'm documentary filmmaking, I'm not gonna be able to bring a light with me when I'm just following people around. I have to use the conditions that I'm in. So it is vital that I have a camera that can shoot low light. And obviously it's very important to have a low aperture lens to be able to do that. Now my second most used lens on this camera is the Canon 70-200 millimeter lens f2.8. This is the best zoom lens on the market. And when I'm out and about at these sporting events, it seems like everybody has this lens and everybody's using it. Now, I don't have it on my camera too often because I'm normally, like I said, really close to my subject, but I do use this lens all the time. The image that it produces is incredible. I love using it to shoot through things. Like for instance, if I'm shooting a fighter who is inside a cage, I can shoot through the fencing and you can barely see it. I love it. I do use it a lot for photography too, which I'll get into later. Now, really quick, two other lenses that I use for my Canon cameras is the Rokinon 85mm f1.4 cinema lens. Now, what's different about this lens than my other lenses is that this one is manual focus only. Now, really quickly, this lens is incredible. It is absolutely stunning. The bokeh, the shallow depth of field you can get from it is incredible. And I actually prefer shooting with a manual focus lens. The problem is I don't get to use it that much because when I'm documentary filmmaking, I can't miss shots. Like I just can't. And when you don't know where someone's gonna be and you don't have a scene rehearsed and you're just following somebody, it's extremely difficult to use a manual focus lens because you just might miss that shot if someone moves unexpectedly or something like that. Now, when I do use this is when I'm in a controlled environment. Let's say the shoe documentary I was making of Billy Hobbs who paints custom cleats. I'm in control where I'm standing, he's just sitting still, I can get those shots. Or when a fighter's training inside a cage and they're not going anywhere, they're not walking around, that's when I like to use this lens to get some super artistic shots. But in terms of when I'm just following somebody around, I normally don't use it. I would normally just pop on the 70-200 if I need that focal length because I have autofocus, or the Sigma 18-35. I wish I could use manual focus only lens more often, but for what I do, it's just not realistic. And then lastly, I have the Canon 50mm ultrasonic. I believe it's f1.4, just prime lens. It's a great lens. I almost never use it on the C200. It stays on my 5D Mark IV, which is the next camera we'll get into right now. So here it is, the Canon 5D Mark IV. This camera is almost always, when I'm out running and gunning, sitting around my neck just like this. So I'll be running and gunning, getting my video with the Canon C200 in my hands, and this will be around my neck, which makes a great lens holder for when I have to switch lenses from the Sigma to the Canon for my video camera. So this 5D Mark IV, lots of times it's being used as a lens holder around my neck, which is kind of funny because that's a pretty expensive lens holder, but I also do take a lot of photos on my shoots. I'm primarily a film guy, I do video, but lots of times with Instagram and everything like that, when you're working for a client, they want photos too. And yes, the Canon C200 does have incredible video that I can take screenshots out of, but nothing's gonna beat a still photo from the 5D Mark IV. I would never label myself a photographer. I really just wanna be known as a filmmaker, but I do think I can take a good photo here and there. So I'm gonna show some photos I've taken with the 5D Mark IV while I talk about it. It's a great camera. I love using it to get behind the scenes shots. When I use the Sigma 18-35 on it, I can only shoot at 35 because it's not a full frame lens, which is why I almost always exclusively use the 70-200, and then the other lens that sits on here all the time is the 50mm Canon that I was talking about earlier. This is a great camera, I love it. I don't really ever use it for video, even though it does have good video functionality, but as you'll see later in this video, when I pack up my camera gear, this is the one that's always on me all the time. I can grab it for video, I can grab it for photo. When my Canon C200 gets put away in its carry-on bag for when I travel, this one stays in my backpack with me all the time in case I just need to do something impromptu on the spot. It's smaller, it's always reliable, and I love it. Lastly, for my cameras, I have the Sony a6400. This is my favorite camera ever. If you guys were looking into starting out with a camera, this is the one to use for video. I love it so much. Now, fun fact, I actually started with a Sony a6300, and that's what I did all the Rise videos on for a few years. When I got this job, I switched to the Sony a6400. It's the same exact camera as the a6300, but it doesn't have a recording limit, so I can record really forever, and it won't stop. The a6300 had a half-hour recording limit, but this one also has a flip-out LCD screen, so you can vlog and stuff like that and see your face. This camera is only $800, which is incredible for the quality that it can produce. This camera's video quality is so good, it can be compared to the Canon C200, which is $5,000 plus in some situations. This camera can do 120 FPS super slow-mo. It can do 4K video for unlimited amount of time, and it's just really reliable. There are 3 lenses I use for my Sony camera. The first is the Sony 18-105mm f4 zoom lens. I purchased this for my documentary on Joe Pyfer and used it for a couple of wedding films after the fact. It's only f4, so it kind of sucks in low light, but that zoom all the way from 18, like wide angle, all the way to 105 is really useful. On top of that, the first lens I actually got, besides the kit lens for that camera, was the Rokinon 50mm f1.2 lens. 60% of the shots you see in From Nothing, the story of Joe Pyfer, were done on that manual focus lens. And that's what I talked about earlier with manual focus. I actually prefer it. It helps me get really creative with pulls and really cinematic shots and shallow depth of field, but autofocus is more convenient for what I do. Either way, that 50mm lens, it has such a near and dear place in my heart with its manual focus glory because my first major film was shot on it primarily, and I love it so much. It's a super great deal for what it costs and what its image looks like in the end, as you can see. Lastly, we have the Sigma 16mm f1.4. This is my favorite lens of all time, and if you want to start off on YouTube and have a really high quality setup, so many of the Rise videos, in fact, I would venture to say 70% of them were shot on that exact setup, the Sony a63 or a6400 with the Sigma 16mm lens. It has an incredibly low depth of field, it looks super professional, and it's nice and wide so you can use it to get all your shots while still taking cinematic, slow-mo, shallow depth of field, B-roll for your channel. It's an incredible lens for the price, and that paired with the Sony is the ultimate beginner setup. And the only reason I say beginner is because of the price point. It produces incredible professional quality video. So those are my 3 cameras: the Canon C200 for my main documentary filmmaking beast for work, the Canon 5D Mark IV for a backup video camera, but primarily a photo camera, and then lastly, my B camera, the Sony a6400 with those 3 lenses. Lastly, a pretty vital piece of equipment that I use on my Sony is the Ronin S. This gimbal is incredible, and I use it only with my Sony. I know that there are people on YouTube who have mounted the Canon C200 on the Ronin S. I'm a little bit scared to, and I think it would be pretty complicated and a little bit expensive with the parts I have to buy, but the Sony is nice and small. I can get it to fly on that gimbal, and that gimbal, what it does is it stabilizes the camera so I can get smooth rolling, pull out, panning shots, all that, and just smooths it out so it looks super cinematic. It's almost like faking a dolly type look. Like when I was doing my studio tour, I use it a lot. When I was doing real estate videos, I use it a lot. It's really cool with the type of shots you can get when you have that ability to do super, super smooth video. I haven't used it as much because I use the Canon C200 primarily, and it's just another piece of equipment I have to travel with, but I'm keeping it around out of hopes for a future dream camera, which I'll talk about last. Oh, I almost forgot the most annoying piece of equipment I have to bring everywhere with me is the Manfrotto tripod. It's got its own bag, it's its own carry-on at the airport. It's a great tripod, really awesome. I'm using it right now, but it's annoying that I have to lug it with me everywhere. In fact, on some trips, I don't bring it because I know I won't be doing interviews. And if I am doing interviews, I'll just hold it or put it on a table and get creative with it. But it is always smart to have a tripod in most cases, so it's with me lots of the time. So that's my current setup, and as I went over last week when I'm traveling, it is a heavy setup. I have to bring a lot of stuff with me, but compared to other professional filmmakers, it's relatively light. As you can see when you're watching me pack this stuff up, in my backpack, I put the Canon 5D Mark IV with the zoom lens attached, laptop charger, camera charger, lots and lots of hard drives and SD cards. I only take the Sigma 16mm with the Sony, I take that off, and the Sony a6400 body is so small, I slide it right near the backpack with the other lens, close that up with the laptop, and then the carry-on, I take off the handle of the C200, the LCD screen, and the microphone, and lay it all in the carry-on and close it up with the Rokinon lens in there. Then I'm all set to go for my trip. I love this setup. I can picture myself using it for a long time to come. However, with the new cameras that are looking to come out at the end of 2020, I'm really excited for a couple of things. One, the Canon C200 is a big camera. It's not the biggest. Like I know there are cameras a lot bigger than it, than Reds and stuff like that. But when you get stuck in cars and you're trying to film somebody in a car, it's really difficult for me, being 6'9", to like kind of hold it in there and fit it in without shoving the camera in someone's face. So ideally for what I do, I think it would be more convenient to have more of a hybrid shooter, one that's a little bit tinier, kind of like a mix between the 5D Mark IV and the C200. But some of the cameras looking that are coming out this year have my dream feature, which is having 4K video, which the Canon does, but also the ability to shoot 120 FPS. If I could shoot 120 FPS at 4K, I'd be the happiest person in the world. I know that those file sizes would be huge, but I deal with huge file sizes all the time when I shoot 12-bit CFast RAW on the C200. If you don't know what that means, I forgot to mention it earlier, but it also was a selling point of the Canon C200 for me. It can shoot raw 4K video, which basically just means that you can color grade the crap out of it and it will look incredible. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this look at the behind the scenes of how I do everything here on YouTube in terms of camera gear and how I do it for my job when I'm out in the field traveling around. I know this had nothing to do with magic, but hey, a little behind the scenes. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you this Thursday for a video that's much more on brand. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you had a great Easter, and I'll see you next time.